"You are fired, Mr. Walker." Richard Voss said it like he was announcing the weather. Calm, flat, almost bored, as he slid the white envelope across the conference table with two fingers. Ethan Walker stood on the other side in a faded work jacket that still carried a brown stain near the cuff from the night before, his left hand wrapped in a clean bandage, his boots leaving faint damp marks on the polished floor. Outside the glass wall of Hawthorne Logistics, rain crawled down the windows in crooked silver lines, blurring the parking lot, the loading docks, and the row of trucks Ethan had kept running for 11 hard years. Marla Quinn from Human Resources sat with a folder open in front of her, her mouth tight, her pen already waiting. Two security guards stood by the door as if Ethan were dangerous. He was not dangerous. He was tired. There was a difference, though people like Richard rarely noticed it. "You abandoned your shift," Marla said. "You caused a delivery delay." Richard leaned back in his leather chair and gave a small laugh. "And before you start, we already heard the story. A woman in a wreck. A heroic rescue. Very moving." Ethan looked at him quietly. It was not a story. Richard's smile hardened. Saving strangers is not company policy. The room should have made some sound after that. Maybe the hum of the lights. Maybe the soft click of Marla's pen. Maybe the distant growl of a truck reversing near Bay 4. But for one breath, everything seemed to hold still. Ethan lowered his eyes to the envelope. He did not reach for it right away. He was thinking of Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, who had coughed herself awake before sunrise and still insisted on packing her own lunch because she did not want to make him late. He was thinking of the pharmacy receipt in his glove box, the asthma refill he had almost not been able to afford, the little pink note she had tucked into his pocket that morning with a crayon heart and the words, "Be brave, Daddy." Ethan swallowed, then asked the only question that mattered. "My daughter's medical insurance. Does it end today?" Marla glanced at Richard before answering. "Coverage terminates according to company policy." "That is not what I asked." His voice stayed low. Not angry, not begging, just steady enough to make the room uncomfortable. Richard drummed his fingers once on the table. "End of the month, assuming there are no disputes." Ethan nodded slowly, as if that small mercy had cost him something to receive. "Thank you." Richard frowned, disappointed that the man had not cracked. Men like Richard enjoyed the sound of breaking more than the work of leading. "Sign the acknowledgement," he said. "Collect your personal items. Security will walk you out." Ethan picked up the pen. His hand hurt when he held it, but he did not show it. The bandage pulled against the cuts across his palm, the same hand that had gripped a shattered window frame less than 12 hours earlier, the same hand that had reached through smoke and rain toward a woman trapped inside an overturned black sport utility vehicle off Route 17. He remembered her eyes opening for half a second, gray and frightened beneath a curtain of wet hair. He remembered her whispering, "Why are you helping me?" He remembered answering, "Because you are still breathing." He had not asked her name. He had not waited for cameras. He had not known she wore a watch worth more than his truck, or that somewhere in a locked hospital room across town, Claire Bennett was waking up with his jacket folded beside her bed and his name missing from every report. Ethan signed the paper. The pen scratched once, twice, then stopped. Marla took the document as if it were evidence. Richard stood and straightened his suit jacket. "For what it is worth, Walker, maybe next time choose your job over some stranger on the road." Ethan looked at him then, really looked at him, not with hatred, not with fear, but with the kind of quiet dignity that makes cruelty feel smaller than it meant to be. "I hope there is never a next time for her," he said. "But if there is, I hope someone stops." No one laughed. Even the guards shifted their feet. Ethan lifted the envelope, tucked it under his arm, and turned toward the door. Behind him, Richard muttered, "Always playing the saint." Ethan kept walking. He had been called worse by better men. What no one in that conference room knew, what not one person behind that glass wall could have guessed, was that the woman Ethan had pulled from the wreck was not just alive. She was powerful, and before the rain dried on Hawthorne's front steps, she would learn exactly what they had done to the man who saved her. The door closed behind Ethan with a soft mechanical click, and the sound followed him down the hallway like a verdict. He walked past the framed safety awards on the wall, past the photographs of smiling executives shaking hands beside polished trucks, past the break room where the coffee machine hissed, and three mechanics suddenly found their shoes more interesting than his face. Nobody spoke. That was the hardest part. Not the envelope under his arm, not the guards behind him, not even the ache in his bandaged hand. It was the silence of people who knew something was wrong but had mortgages, children, medical bills, and fear sitting heavy on their shoulders. Ethan understood fear. He just never respected it enough to let it become cruelty. At the end of the hall, the security guard named Paul cleared his throat. He was older, with gray in his beard and tired eyes. "I am sorry, Ethan," he said under his breath. Ethan paused beside the time clock where he had punched in before sunrise for more than a decade. "You did not fire me, Paul. Still does not feel right." Ethan gave him a small nod. Most things that are wrong do not announce themselves. They just ask good people to look away. Paul lowered his eyes, and Ethan kept moving. At his workstation near Bay 4, the air smelled of diesel, rubber, old coffee, and rain blown in through the loading dock doors. His metal locker stood half open, a dent near the handle from years ago when a forklift had backed into it. Inside were the pieces of a small life built around work and duty. A spare flannel shirt, a photograph of Lily missing both front teeth, a child's drawing of a blue truck with wings, a pocket Bible with his late wife's name written inside the cover, and a faded certificate that said Ethan Walker had completed advanced fleet safety training. He placed each item carefully into a cardboard box. Not quickly, not dramatically, carefully, because dignity lives in small movements when the world tries to strip a man down. Across the bay, a young technician named Caleb watched him with red eyes and a wrench hanging uselessly in his hand. "Mr. Walker," Caleb said, voice cracking. "I should have said something in there." Ethan looked over. "You have a little boy at home, right?" Caleb nodded. "Then go home to him tonight. Teach him to tell the truth earlier than you did today." There was no anger in the words, and somehow that made them land harder. Caleb looked away, ashamed but listening. Ethan lifted the box and turned toward the exit, and that was when Richard Voss appeared at the far end of the bay with Marla beside him, walking like a man who wanted witnesses. "Before you leave," Richard called, "company property stays here." Ethan stopped. "I already turned in my badge." Richard pointed at the navy work jacket folded over Ethan's box. "Uniform." The workers nearby went still. Even the rain seemed to soften against the metal roof. Ethan looked down at the jacket. It was stained at the cuff, burned near the sleeve, and patched twice at the shoulder. It had covered Claire Bennett when she shivered beside the road. It had smelled of smoke, rain, and gasoline, and somehow, to him, it still felt like the right thing to carry. "It is damaged," Ethan said. "I will pay for it." Richard laughed once. "You are not in a position to pay for much, are you?" A few nervous chuckles rose and died quickly. Ethan did not answer. He simply removed the jacket from the box, folded it once, then twice, smoothing the sleeves as though it were a flag. He placed it on the workbench in front of Richard. "There," he said, clean enough for what it represented. Richard's face tightened. He had wanted resistance. He had wanted begging. He had wanted Ethan to make a scene so the firing would feel justified. But Ethan gave him none of that. He picked up his box again, walked past the trucks he had repaired, past the men who would remember this moment longer than they wanted to, and stepped out into the rain. By the time he reached his old Ford, the cardboard had begun to soften at the edges. He set the box on the passenger seat, beside Lily's booster cushion and the pharmacy bag, then sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For a moment, his reflection stared back from the wet windshield, older than 38, quieter than defeat, but not broken. Then his phone buzzed. A notification from the school nurse. Lily was coughing again. Ethan closed his eyes, breathed once, and started the truck. He had lost his job. He had not lost his reason to keep going. The old Ford rolled through the rain with the heater coughing warm air in short, uneven breaths, and Ethan kept one hand on the wheel while the other rested carefully on his knee, the bandage tight across his palm. The school was only 7 miles away, but that morning it felt farther, as if the whole county had stretched itself between him and the one person he could not afford to disappoint. Gray clouds hung low over the Ohio back roads. Puddles trembled under passing tires. Mailboxes leaned along the roadside like tired witnesses. Ethan drove past the gas station where he had bought Lily's cough syrup, past the church sign that read "Grace is still grace when life is hard," and for the first time all day, his jaw loosened. He was not angry anymore. Anger required energy, and every ounce of his belonged to his daughter. At Millbrook Elementary, he parked near the curb and sat still for a second, staring at the cardboard box on the passenger seat. Lily's photograph smiled up from the top of it, missing teeth, wild curls, purple backpack, the kind of joy that made a man ashamed of every hopeless thought. He turned the picture face down gently, not because he could not bear to see it, but because he needed to be strong before he walked inside. The school office smelled like pencil shavings, hand sanitizer, and cafeteria pizza. A secretary with silver glasses looked up and softened immediately when she saw him. "Mr. Walker, Lily is in the nurse's room. She is okay, but she had a rough spell after recess." "Thank you, ma'am," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but his boots moved faster than before. In the nurse's room, Lily sat on the edge of a vinyl cot with a paper cup of water in both hands. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair tucked behind one ear, her little sneakers swinging above the floor. When she saw him, her face lit up first, then changed. Children notice what adults try to hide. They see the shoulders, the eyes, the way a father holds an empty day in his hands. "Daddy," she said, "why are you here so early?" Ethan crouched in front of her, ignoring the pull in his palm. "Because I heard the bravest girl in 3rd grade needed a ride." She looked at his bandage. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I forget how brave you are." That earned the smallest smile. Then she touched the edge of his sleeve, the place where the work jacket should have been. "Where is your Hawthorne coat?" Ethan paused. There were lies that protected children for a minute and truths that protected them for a lifetime. He chose something in between. "I do not work there anymore, sweetheart." Lily stared at him. "Did you do something wrong?" The question was soft, but it landed deeper than Richard's cruelty ever could. Ethan shook his head. "No, I helped someone. And sometimes doing the right thing still costs something before it gives anything back." Lily thought about that with the seriousness only children and saints seem to have. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of construction paper. "I made this before I started coughing." She handed it to him. Ethan opened it carefully. The drawing showed a man in a blue shirt pulling a woman away from a smoking black car while rain fell in long crayon lines. The man had big hands, yellow hair, and a crooked smile. Above him, Lily had written in uneven purple letters, "My dad saves people." Ethan looked at the paper, and the room blurred for a moment. He did not cry, not fully. He simply bowed his head and breathed through the ache in his chest like a man taking shelter from a storm no one else could see. "That is a good drawing," he whispered. "It is true," Lily said. The nurse turned away politely, pretending to organize cotton balls that did not need organizing. Ethan folded the picture once and placed it inside his shirt pocket, over his heart. "Come on," he said. "Let us get you home." But as he lifted Lily's backpack, his phone began to ring. The number was unknown. He almost ignored it. Bills, recruiters, mistakes, bad news. They all came from numbers without names. But something made him answer. "This is Ethan Walker." A woman's voice came through, composed and careful. "Mr. Walker, my name is Nora Whitfield. I work for Claire Bennett." Ethan looked toward the rain-streaked window. He did not know the name, but he knew the silence that followed it. "I think you may know her as the woman you pulled from the wreck last night." Lily's hand slipped into his. Nora continued. "Ms. Bennett would like you to return to Hawthorne Logistics this afternoon." Ethan glanced at the cardboard box in his truck through the glass doors, then down at his daughter's worried eyes. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I was just fired from there." Nora's answer was calm, but something in it carried weight. "Yes, Mr. Walker. That is exactly why she is asking you to come back." For a long moment, Ethan did not answer. The nurse's room seemed to shrink around him. The paper cup in Lily's hand, the rain ticking softly against the window, the unknown voice waiting on the phone as if the whole day had reached a door and refused to open it without him. "Why?" he asked. Nora Whitfield did not rush her reply. "Because Ms. Bennett believes Hawthorne Logistics made a serious mistake." Ethan looked down at Lily. Her fingers tightened around his. "People make mistakes every day, man. Not all of them cost a good man his job." The words were measured, professional, but beneath them was something else, something like restrained anger wrapped in polished manners. Ethan stepped a few feet away from the cot, lowering his voice. "I do not want trouble. I have my daughter with me, and she is not feeling well. Ms. Bennett understands. She also asked me to say that your daughter is welcome, and that you will not be walking into that building alone." Ethan closed his eyes. He had heard promises before. Supervisors promised fair reviews. Insurance clerks promised callbacks. Men in suits promised things would be looked into. Promises were easy when someone else had to survive the waiting. Who was Claire Bennett? He asked. On the other end, Nora paused just long enough for the question to become heavier. She is the woman whose life you saved last night. That is not what I asked. A faint breath came through the phone, almost respect. She is the founder of Bennett Capital Group. She is also the lead investor in the acquisition of Hawthorne Logistics. Ethan turned toward the window, where his old Ford sat under the gray sky with his cardboard box on the front seat. Acquisition. The word felt too large for a man who had just been escorted out like a problem. I think you have the wrong Ethan Walker, he said quietly. No, sir, Nora replied. We have the right one. Across town, Claire Bennett sat upright in a private hospital room with a white blanket over her knees and a thin bandage at her temple. The room was warm, expensive, and quiet in the way money can purchase quiet, but it could not purchase peace. On the chair beside her bed lay Ethan's damaged work jacket, sealed in a clear hospital bag, the sleeve darkened where rain and road had marked it. Claire had asked for it the moment she woke up. She had not remembered the crash clearly, only flashes. Glass. Rain. A man's voice. A hand reaching through the dark. Because you are still breathing. Those words had followed her back into consciousness more faithfully than any doctor, any assistant, any board member waiting for an update. Nora stood near the foot of the bed with a tablet in her hands. His full name is Ethan Daniel Walker, 38, widower. One daughter, Lily Walker, age 8, senior maintenance technician at Hawthorne Logistics, until 7:42 this morning. Claire's expression changed, not dramatically, not with tears, just a small stillness across her face, the kind that came before power moved. Until this morning, terminated for abandoning his shift and contributing to a delivery delay. Claire looked at the jacket again. He abandoned his shift to pull me out of a burning vehicle. Yes. Nora swiped to another file. There is more. Ethan submitted 6 safety complaints over the past 14 months regarding brake maintenance records in the regional fleet. 3 were marked resolved without inspection signatures. 2 were dismissed by Richard Voss. 1 was forwarded to Human Resources and placed in his personnel file as insubordination. Claire's hand closed slowly over the blanket. Outside her window, the city moved beneath low clouds, unaware that one quiet man's life had just become the center of a storm. The sport utility vehicle from last night, Claire said. Was it connected to Hawthorne? Nora looked up. It was serviced under their executive transport contract last week. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of consequence. Claire turned her face toward the rain-streaked glass. And for a moment she was not the billionaire, not the investor, not the woman who could move companies with a signature. She was simply a woman alive because a tired father chose mercy over convenience. Finish the acquisition, she said. Nora nodded. The closing documents are ready, but the board expected you to rest. Claire reached for the edge of the bed and slowly stood. Her body was weak, but her voice was not. A man bled in the rain so I could live. I can stand for 10 minutes. Nora's eyes softened. And Ethan Walker? Claire looked down at the jacket one last time. Bring him back to Hawthorne. Today, before they have time to rewrite the truth. By the time Ethan ended the call, Lily was watching him with the solemn attention of a child who had learned that adults sometimes used calm voices to hide frightening things. Do we have to go back? She asked. Ethan slipped the phone into his pocket and knelt until his eyes were level with hers. Only if you feel well enough. Lily straightened a little, as if bravery had posture. Is the lady from the car okay? I think so. Then we should go. He studied her face, flushed from coughing but steady with the kind of goodness that had never yet been taught to protect itself. Why do you say that? Lily shrugged, clutching her backpack strap. Because when people come back to say thank you, you should let them. Ethan almost smiled. There it was again, grace arriving in the voice of an 8-year-old, simple enough to shame every boardroom in America. He signed her out at the front office, thanked the nurse twice, and led Lily through the rain to the old Ford. The cardboard box still sat in the passenger seat, softened at the corners, the photograph, the Bible, and the safety certificate resting together like the remains of a life someone else had decided was disposable. Ethan buckled Lily into the back seat, then stood for a moment with his hand on the door. He looked at the school, the wet flags snapping against the pole, the yellow buses lined along the curb, and wondered how many fathers had sat in parking lots just like this one, trying to look unafraid for children who deserved better than adult uncertainty. "Daddy," Lily called from inside. "Yes, sweetheart. Can I bring my drawing?" Ethan touched the folded paper in his shirt pocket. "I already have it." She smiled, and that was enough to get him moving. The drive back to Hawthorne took them along Route 17, the same road where the night before everything had changed. Ethan tried not to look when they passed the bent guardrail, but his eyes found it anyway. Orange cones stood in a loose line near the shoulder. A dark stain marked the asphalt where rainwater gathered. One piece of broken plastic glittered in the ditch like a black tooth. Lily leaned toward the window. "Is that where it happened?" Ethan kept his voice gentle. "Yes." "Were you scared?" He answered after a pause. "Yes." "But you still stopped." The wipers swept across the windshield, left to right, like a slow metronome keeping time with his thoughts. "Being brave does not mean you are not scared, Lily. It means somebody needs help more than you need to feel safe." She thought about that, then hugged her backpack to her chest. Mom would have stopped too. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. Yes, she would have. At Hawthorne Logistics, the parking lot looked different from the outside now. The same trucks were lined up by the docks. The same company flags snapped in the rain. The same glass doors reflected the gray sky. But Ethan no longer belonged to the place, and somehow that made every detail sharper. He parked near the visitor spaces because his employee badge no longer worked, then helped Lily out of the truck. She slipped her small hand into his bandaged one without thinking. He was just a little, she noticed, and moved to his other side. "Sorry, nothing to be sorry for." As they approached the entrance, employees began to turn their heads. A few faces appeared behind office windows. Caleb stood near Bay 4, frozen with a rag in his hand. Paul, the security guard, opened the front door before Ethan could reach for it. His expression was different now, confused and nervous, as if the building itself had started whispering secrets. "Ethan," Paul said quietly, "something is happening." "What kind of something?" Before Paul could answer, a black Cadillac pulled into the front drive, then another, then a third. Their tires hissed across the wet pavement. The lobby fell silent behind the glass. Richard Voss stepped out of his office upstairs and looked down over the railing, his face shifting from irritation to calculation. Marla appeared beside him with her folder pressed to her chest. The first Cadillac door opened, and Nora Whitfield stepped out beneath a black umbrella. Then Claire Bennett emerged from the second car, pale but steady, wearing a cream coat over dark slacks, a small bandage visible at the temple. Ethan recognized her eyes before he recognized anything else. The same gray eyes from the rain. The same woman who had asked why he was helping her. Lily whispered, "Daddy, is that her?" Ethan did not answer. Claire walked toward him, every employee watching, every sound fading except the rain. Richard hurried down the stairs, smoothing his tie, smiling the expensive smile of a man who had mistaken power for welcome. "Ms. Bennett," he called, "we were not expecting you in person." Claire stopped beside Ethan, not Richard. She looked first at the bandage on his hand, then at Lily holding his arm, then finally at the man who had fired him. "I know," she said. "That is why I came." Claire Bennett did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The kind of authority Richard Voss understood usually arrived with noise, titles, and men rushing ahead to open doors. Claire arrived with rain on her coat, a bandage at her temple, and a silence so clean it made the whole lobby straighten. Richard stepped forward with one hand extended. "Ms. Bennett, let me say how relieved we all are that you are recovering. We had no idea you were personally connected to last night's unfortunate incident." Claire looked at his hand, but did not take it. "Unfortunate incident," she repeated softly. The words seemed smaller when she said them. Richard lowered his hand and adjusted his smile. "Of course, we are prepared to cooperate fully with your team. Hawthorne values transparency." From somewhere behind Ethan, Caleb made a sound like he had swallowed a confession. Lily pressed closer to her father's side. Ethan felt her fingers tremble, so he covered them gently with his good hand. He wanted to tell her not to be afraid, but the truth was, he did not know what was happening either. Nora Whitfield stepped beside Claire and opened a slim leather folder. At 9:36 this morning, Nora said, her voice crisp enough to cut through the rain. Bennett Capital Group completed its acquisition of Hawthorne Logistics and all regional subsidiaries. The lobby went silent. Not quiet, silent. The receptionist stopped typing. A driver standing near the vending machines lowered his coffee. Marla Quinn's face lost its practiced color. Richard blinked twice, then gave a stiff little laugh. Well, yes, I was aware closing was approaching, but I understood there would be a transition period. Claire finally turned fully toward him. There was. It ended 10 minutes ago. Richard's smile disappeared. Upstairs, office doors began to open. Men and women stepped out carefully, drawn by the shift in the air. Claire looked around the lobby, not like a visitor admiring a purchase, but like a physician examining a patient who had been ignored too long. I need everyone to hear me clearly, she said. Yesterday evening, I was in a vehicle serviced under Hawthorne's executive transport contract. That vehicle experienced a mechanical failure that had been warned about repeatedly. Richard's jaw tightened. Ms. Bennett, with respect, those details are still under review. No, Claire said. One word. Calm. Final. They were hidden from review. Nora removed several printed pages from the folder and handed them to Paul, the security guard. Please give these to the front desk. Paul looked startled, then obeyed. The receptionist took the papers with shaking hands, and within moments, the lobby display screens flickered from company announcements to scan documents. Ethan's name appeared at the top of the first report. Ethan Daniel Walker, Fleet Brake Safety Concern, submitted 14 months earlier. Then another report. Then another. 6 in all, each marked dismissed, delayed, or resolved without inspection. The workers stared. Caleb covered his mouth. Marla whispered, "That should not be on the public screen." Claire heard her. Truth usually looks improper to people who benefit from hiding it. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice as though power could be repaired privately. "Claire, this is not the appropriate form." Ethan noticed the use of her first name. So did everyone else. Claire's eyes did not move. "Mr. Voss, you will address me as Ms. Bennett in front of the employees whose safety your leadership compromised." Richard flushed. Lily looked up at Ethan, and though she did not understand every word, she understood enough. Her father's name was on the screen. Her father had told the truth. Across the room, Marla clutched her folder with both hands. Claire turned to her next. "Ms. Quinn, this morning you processed Mr. Walker's termination for abandoning his shift." Marla's voice came out thin. "According to the information provided by operations." Nora lifted another page. "The same operations department that received his safety reports." Claire looked back at Richard. "The man you fired did not abandon his duty. He honored it after this company abandoned theirs." No one moved. Even the rain seemed to wade against the glass. Ethan felt every eye shifting toward him now, not with pity, not with suspicion, but with the painful awakening of respect. He wanted to disappear, because humble men do not know what to do when the truth finally stands beside them in public. Claire stepped closer to him, her expression softening for the first time. "Mr. Walker," she said, "last night, you pulled me from that vehicle without knowing my name." Ethan looked down, uncomfortable. "You needed help. And months before that, you tried to help everyone in this building." Richard opened his mouth, but no defense came. Marla looked at the floor. The lobby, once full of whispers and nervous glances, had become a room of held breath. Claire faced the employees again. This is what happens when a company mistakes silence for weakness. Then she turned back to Richard Voss. "And this is what happens when the person you tried to erase becomes the witness you cannot afford." Richard Voss stood beneath his own lobby lights, looking smaller than the portrait of leadership he had spent years building. His mouth opened once, then closed, and for the first time that morning, he seemed to understand that a man can polish a title until it shines and still have nothing solid underneath it. Claire Bennett turned to Nora without taking her eyes off him. "Begin the internal hold." Nora nodded, already prepared. Marla took one step forward. "Ms. Bennett, before decisions are made, human resources should be allowed to present context." Claire looked at her then, not coldly, but with a sadness that was somehow worse. Context is what people ask for after they have ignored conscience. Marla froze. The lobby screen changed again. This time it showed a chain of emails, each one marked with dates, each one carrying Ethan's careful, plain-spoken warnings. Brake response delay on Unit 42. Inspection signature missing. Driver reports unusual vibration above 40 miles per hour. Requesting full fleet review before weather season. The words were not dramatic. They were not emotional. They were the kind of ordinary truth that saves lives when someone has enough humility to listen. A mechanic near the rear of the crowd whispered. He told them. Another employee answered, barely audible. He told us too. Richard turned sharply. Enough. None of you understand how operations work at this level. That old tone entered his voice again. The polished command he used when he wanted working people to remember their place. But it did not land there. Same way anymore. Once truth has entered a room, arrogance sounds like an echo from somewhere already gone. Claire stepped aside so every employee could see Ethan standing with Lily beside him. Mr. Walker, she said, did anyone at Hawthorne ask you to falsify inspection logs? Ethan's shoulders tightened. He did not want the center of the room. He wanted a quiet kitchen, Lily's cough medicine measured correctly, and enough work to keep the lights on. But some moments are not chosen. They are handed to a person because silence would cost too much. I was told to keep the trucks moving, he said. Richard snapped. That is not an answer. Claire lifted one hand, and Richard stopped as if the air itself had warned him. Ethan continued. When I asked for more time to inspect the brake systems, I was told delays were expensive. When I refused to sign off on units I had not checked, I was told I had a bad attitude. When I put it in writing, I was told I was creating problems. His voice stayed steady. No shouting, no performance, just truth laid down one piece at a time. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide, proud and frightened all at once. Claire asked softly, why did you keep reporting it? Ethan glanced at the drivers gathered near the vending machines. Men and women with tired faces, lunch coolers, rain jackets, and families waiting somewhere beyond the loading docks. Because somebody had to drive those trucks. The sentence moved through the lobby like a bell. Simple, heavy, clean. One of the drivers, a woman named Teresa Hill with silver hair tucked under a ball cap, stepped forward. He fixed my rig twice after hours, she said. No charge. Said the steering felt wrong, and he would rather be late for dinner than let me get hurt on the road. Caleb raised his hand awkwardly. He trained me to check the things the checklist skipped. Paul added from near the door. He stayed last Christmas Eve when the heat went out in Bay 2. Did not clock the overtime. More voices came, not loud, not polished, but honest. One by one, the people who had been silent found their courage in small pieces. Ethan lowered his eyes, overwhelmed. He had never collected favors. He had simply lived in a way that left evidence. Richard's face darkened. This is sentimental nonsense. Claire turned to him fully. No, Mr. Voss. This is testimony. Nora handed him a sealed envelope. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending independent investigation. Your access to company systems, facilities, and accounts has been revoked. Marla's breath caught as Nora handed her a second envelope. Miss Quinn, the same applies to you. Richard looked around as if someone might rescue him from the consequences he had signed for others. No one moved. Not the guards. Not the managers. Not the workers he had mocked behind closed doors. The silence did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to everyone who had finally seen the truth. Claire stepped back beside Ethan and Lily. This company will not be rebuilt on fear, she said. It will be rebuilt on safety, respect, and the dignity of the people who keep it alive. Ethan felt Lily squeeze his hand. He looked down, and she whispered, Daddy, they know now. Ethan nodded once, his throat too tight for words. Across the lobby, Richard Voss stood holding the envelope that ended his authority, while the man he had fired stood empty-handed, wounded, and seen. And in that quiet, the whole building seemed to understand which one had truly been powerful all along. Claire let the silence settle before she spoke again, because some truths need room to become real. Richard still stood near the center of the lobby with the suspension letter in his hand, his shoulders stiff, his eyes moving from employee to employee, as if searching for one loyal face. He found none. Marla held her own envelope against her chest, no longer looking like the woman who had calmly explained company policy to a father worried about his daughter's medicine. Power had left them quickly, but not unfairly. It had simply returned to the place where responsibility should have been. Claire turned toward the front desk. Nora, please confirm the employee actions. Nora opened her tablet and read with careful precision. Effective today, all terminated or penalized staff connected to documented safety concerns will be reviewed by an independent labor firm. Medical coverage for affected employees and dependents will be reinstated during the review period. All regional fleet units will be grounded for inspection within 48 hours. No driver will be asked to operate equipment that has not been certified safe. A sound moved through the lobby. Not applause, not celebration, but relief. It came out in small breaths, lowered heads, hands covering mouths. The fragile noise people make when they realize someone with power has finally chosen protection over profit. Teresa Hill wiped at one eye with the back of her sleeve. Caleb stared at the floor like a young man being given a second chance he did not deserve yet, but intended to earn. Ethan stood very still. He should have felt vindicated. He should have felt the hot satisfaction people imagine when those who hurt them are exposed. But what he felt was quieter and heavier. He felt the weight of every mile those trucks had traveled while warnings sat unread. He felt the ache of all the workers who had learned to keep quiet so their children could eat. He felt Lily's hand in his, and that was the thing that kept him steady. Claire faced the employees. "I cannot undo what fear allowed here," she said. "I cannot give back the nights you worried, the reports ignored, or the respect that should have been basic. But I can tell you what happens next." She turned to Ethan. "Mr. Walker, may I speak with you?" Ethan looked down at Lily. She nodded as if she had been appointed his advisor. He stepped forward, still holding her hand. Claire's expression softened when she saw the child move with him rather than behind him. "Your daughter may stay," Claire said. "She has earned the right to hear this too." Lily stood a little taller. Claire reached into Nora's folder and withdrew a page Ethan recognized immediately. It was his first safety report, the one he had written 14 months ago at his kitchen table after Lily had gone to sleep. He remembered the cheap blue pen, the coffee gone cold, the rain that night too. He had written plainly because he did not know how to write like executives. He had written carefully because lives were not casual things. Claire held it up. "This report was ignored by management," she said. "But it was not wrong." Ethan's throat tightened. "I was just doing my job." "No," Claire replied. "You were doing the job above your job because the people above you refused to do theirs." The lobby absorbed that sentence like dry ground receiving rain. Richard looked away. Claire continued, "I am creating a new position at Hawthorne Logistics, Director of Safety and Human Dignity Operations. It will have authority over fleet inspection standards, driver reporting, maintenance compliance, and worker protection channels. No supervisor will be able to bury a safety concern without independent review." Ethan stared at her. "Ms. Bennett, I am a mechanic. You are a man people trusted before I bought this company. I do not have a college degree. You have 11 years of evidence." He shook his head slightly, not refusing, just overwhelmed. "There are people better qualified." Claire's voice remained gentle. "Qualified people built the system that failed. I am asking the man who tried to stop it." Lily tugged his hand. Ethan looked down. Her cheeks were still pink from her cough, her eyes bright with a faith that frightened him because children believe fathers can become what they need to become. "Daddy," she whispered. "Mom would say yes." The words found the deepest room in him. For a moment, Ethan could almost see his wife in the old kitchen light, smiling that quiet smile that always made hard things feel possible. He looked at Claire, then at the workers, then at the trucks beyond the rain-streaked glass. "I will do it," he said, "but not for revenge." Claire nodded. "Good. Revenge is too small for what needs rebuilding." Ethan took a breath. "I will do it for them, for the drivers, for the people who were afraid to speak, for my daughter, so she knows telling the truth is still worth something." No one clapped at first. The lobby was too full for that, too full of shame, grace, relief, and the strange mercy of second chances. Then Paul placed one hand over his heart. Teresa bowed her head. Caleb whispered, "Thank you, sir." And Richard Voss, who had once called Ethan a man in no position to pay for much, stood wordless as the single father he dismissed was handed not charity, but trust. For several seconds after Ethan said yes, no one in the Hawthorne lobby seemed to know what to do with goodness when it was not followed by a demand. The rain softened outside. The trucks waited beyond the glass. Richard Voss stood with his suspension letter hanging at his side, and Marla Quinn stared at the floor as if company policy had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Claire Bennett extended her hand to Ethan, not as a billionaire rewarding a poor man, but as one human being honoring another. Ethan looked at her hand, then at his bandaged one. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I am not much for handshakes today." Claire smiled for the first time, small but real. "Then we will call it understood." Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out the drawing she had made at school, the one with rain, smoke, and a man pulling a woman from danger. She held it up to Claire. "I drew my dad saving you." Claire bent slightly to look at it, and something in her face changed. Not power, not business. Memory. "You made him look very brave," she said. Lily shook her head. "He already is." Ethan turned away for a moment, pretending to check the box in his arms, but everyone saw the emotion he could not hide. Sometimes a man can survive insult, job loss, and fear, but still come undone when his child tells the truth with no agenda. Claire looked back at the employees. "Hawthorne will close operations for the rest of the day. Everyone will be paid. Go home to your families. Tomorrow, we begin again, properly." That word, properly, settled over the room like a promise. One by one, workers began to move, not rushing, not cheering, but breathing differently. Teresa Hill came to Ethan first and touched his shoulder. "About time they listened to you." Caleb approached next, eyes wet and voice low. "I am sorry I stayed quiet." Ethan looked at him with the same steady grace he had carried all day. "Then do better next time." That is how second chances work. Caleb nodded like he had been handed both forgiveness and homework. Paul opened the front doors, and cool rain-scented air entered the lobby. Richard tried to walk past Ethan without looking at him, but Claire stopped him with one sentence. "Mr. Voss, leave the badge." Richard removed it slowly and placed it on the front desk. For years, that badge had opened doors for him. Now it only made a small plastic sound against the counter. He glanced at Ethan, searching for triumph, anger, anything he could call weakness. Ethan gave him none. "I hope you learned from this," Ethan said. Richard looked away first. That was the only apology the room would ever get, and somehow it was enough. Later that afternoon, after the employees had gone and the rain had faded to a mist, Ethan stood in the small upstairs office Claire had assigned him temporarily. It had a metal desk, a window facing the loading docks, and nothing on the walls except a crooked calendar from the previous month. His cardboard box sat on the desk. Lily spun gently in the office chair until Ethan gave her the look every father knows how to give, and she stopped with a guilty smile. Claire stepped into the doorway carrying Ethan's damaged navy work jacket, now cleaned as much as it could be and folded carefully in her arms. "The hospital returned this," she said. "I thought you might want it back." Ethan took it slowly. The sleeve still showed a faint scar from the night before. He ran his fingers over the fabric, remembering rain on asphalt, Lily coughing in the morning, Richard laughing across the table, and the strange path Mercy had taken to bring him here. He did not hang the jacket in a closet. He placed it on the back of the chair where anyone entering the room would see it. Not as a trophy, not as proof of suffering. As a reminder, a man should never be ashamed of the uniform he wore while doing right. Lily walked to the window and pointed at the trucks. "Are you going to fix all of them?" Ethan smiled gently. "Not alone." Claire stood beside him, quiet now, her power softened into respect. "No one rebuilds a broken place alone," she said. Ethan looked out over the yard, where puddles reflected a pale break in the clouds. "Then we will start with the brakes," he said. "And after that?" Lily asked. Ethan touched the drawing in his shirt pocket. "After that, we teach people they do not have to be afraid to tell the truth." And that was how Hawthorne changed, not in one grand speech, not in a burst of applause, but through inspections signed honestly, drivers heard respectfully, workers treated like lives instead of numbers, and a single father who never needed revenge to be powerful. Years later, people would still talk about the day Claire Bennett came through the rain and bought the company that had thrown Ethan Walker away. But Ethan never told it that way. When Lily asked him what really happened, he would simply say, "Someone needed help. I stopped, and God made sure the truth found its way home." If this story touched your heart, share in the comments what you believe matters more in life: power that controls people or quiet dignity that protects them. And if you have ever seen a good person finally be recognized after being misunderstood, let their story live here too. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.